The conference room had never felt smaller. 23 people crammed around a table meant for 12, all eyes fixed on the young woman sitting across from me. Her resume trembled slightly in her manicured hands, and I could see the exact moment she recognized my name on the placard in front of me. The color drained from her face, like water from a broken glass. "So Jessica," I said, my voice steady and professional, "tell me why you think you'd be a good fit for our marketing coordinator position. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you." 6 months ago, this same woman had watched her father destroy my career with a single sentence. 6 months ago, she had smiled as I packed my desk while he announced that family came first in his business decisions. 6 months ago, she had taken my job, my office, and my 5 years of hard work without a second thought. Now she was interviewing to work for me. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt to breathe. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start from the beginning, because the real story isn't about revenge. It's about what happens when you refuse to let someone else's cruelty define your future. My name is Emma Rodriguez, and until 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly where my life was heading. I had been the senior marketing coordinator at Westfield & Associates for 5 years. Working my way up from an entry-level position through pure determination and 60-hour work weeks. The small advertising agency specialized in local businesses, and I had single-handedly built their digital marketing department from nothing into their most profitable division. Every morning, I arrived at the office at 7:30 sharp, a full hour before anyone else. I loved those quiet moments when the building belonged to just me and the cleaning crew finishing their rounds. The elevator would carry me to the 3rd floor, where I'd unlock the glass doors to our modest but efficiently designed workspace. 22 employees, including myself, worked in an open floor plan that somehow managed to feel collaborative rather than chaotic. My desk sat in the corner by the windows, positioned so I could see both the parking lot and the entrance to our conference room. It wasn't the biggest workspace, but it was mine. Personal touches accumulated over 5 years made it feel like home, a small, succulent plant that somehow thrived despite the fluorescent lighting. A framed photo of my parents at my college graduation, and a coffee mug emblazoned with "World's Okayest Marketer" that my younger brother had given me for Christmas. The work itself energized me in ways I struggled to explain to friends outside the industry. There's something magical about taking a small business owner's passion and translating it into campaigns that actually drive results. Mrs. Chen's family restaurant went from struggling to survive to having a 2-week waiting list after I redesigned their social media strategy. Thompson's hardware store saw a 40% increase in foot traffic within 3 months of launching the local SEO campaign I developed for them. Each success felt personal, like I was helping dreams come true rather than just moving numbers on a spreadsheet. Robert Westfield, the agency owner, had hired me straight out of college when I was 22 and desperate for any opportunity to prove myself. The interview process had been surprisingly thorough for such a small company. He'd asked detailed questions about digital marketing trends, challenged me to create a mock campaign on the spot, and somehow managed to make me feel both nervous and excited about the possibility of working there. "We're not looking for someone who wants to coast," he'd said during that first meeting, leaning back in his chair with the kind of confidence that comes from building something from nothing. "This industry changes faster than fashion trends. We need people who can adapt, learn, and push boundaries." I'd nodded eagerly, probably too eagerly, but his words resonated with something deep in my chest. Adaptation and learning weren't just professional skills for me. They were survival mechanisms I'd developed growing up as the daughter of immigrants who'd sacrificed everything to give their children opportunities they'd never had. Those early years at Westfield & Associates tested every limit I thought I had. I learned graphic design software during lunch breaks, studied analytics until my eyes burned, and volunteered for every challenging project Robert threw my way. When he suggested I might want to specialize in digital marketing because that's where the industry is heading, I threw myself into the transition with the kind of intensity that worried my friends and thrilled my parents. The digital marketing department, when I started building it, consisted of me, a laptop, and a budget of $800 per month. 5 years later, it generated 60% of the company's revenue and employed 6 people. I'd hired and trained every member of my team, developed the systems we used, and created the processes that turned creative ideas into measurable results. My proudest achievement wasn't any single campaign, though. It was the culture I'd helped foster within my department. We worked hard, incredibly hard, but we also celebrated each other's successes and supported each other through failures. When Marcus, one of my graphic designers, was going through a difficult divorce, the team quietly redistributed his workload without making him feel inadequate. When Sarah landed her first major client, we turned the conference room into an impromptu celebration space complete with cake and embarrassingly enthusiastic cheering. Robert seemed to appreciate what we'd built together. He frequently mentioned our department's success during company meetings, and twice he'd given me bonuses that were substantial enough to help my parents with their mortgage payments. The money mattered, of course, but the recognition mattered more. For someone who'd grown up feeling invisible in a world that often overlooked people like my family, being seen and valued professionally felt like a form of validation I'd never experienced before. The morning everything changed started like any other Tuesday in March. I arrived at 7:30, coffee in hand, mentally preparing for a day that included client presentations, budget reviews, and a team meeting about our upcoming campaign for the city's summer festival. The parking lot was nearly empty, except for Robert's silver BMW and a red Honda I didn't recognize. As I walked through the office toward my desk, I noticed something unusual. Robert's office light was on, and I could hear muffled conversation coming from behind his closed door. This wasn't entirely strange. He occasionally had early morning meetings with potential clients or vendors, but something about the tone of the voices made me pause. I settled at my desk and began my usual routine of checking emails and reviewing the day's priorities, but I found myself distracted by the ongoing conversation in Robert's office. The voices grew louder occasionally, and I caught fragments of discussion that seemed more personal than professional. References to family obligations and making room for new opportunities drifted through the thin walls. At 8:15, Robert's office door opened, and he emerged with a young woman I'd never seen before. She appeared to be in her mid-20s, with perfectly styled blonde hair and the kind of polished appearance that suggested either expensive taste or expensive help. Her clothing was impeccable, a tailored blazer that probably cost more than I spent on clothes in 6 months, paired with shoes that clicked against the floor with the confidence of someone who'd never worried about whether she belonged somewhere. Robert's demeanor struck me as unusual. Normally, he maintained a professional distance with visitors, friendly but clearly in charge. With this woman, however, his behavior seemed different. More personal, more familiar. He laughed at something she said, the kind of genuine laughter you share with family rather than business contacts. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They talked quietly by the reception area for several minutes while I pretended to focus on my computer screen. I couldn't make out specific words, but their body language suggested comfort with each other that went beyond a typical client relationship. When other employees began arriving for the day, Robert guided the woman back toward his office, but not before I noticed her glancing around the workspace with the calculating gaze of someone assessing, rather than merely observing. The rest of the morning proceeded normally on the surface, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something significant was shifting beneath the routine. Robert emerged from his office periodically to check on various projects, but his usual enthusiastic engagement seemed forced, distracted. He asked about our summer festival campaign with less interest than I'd expected, given how much revenue the project represented for the company. During lunch, I found myself eating alone in the small break room, while most of my colleagues had gone out to enjoy the unusually warm March weather. I'd planned to use the time to review campaign analytics, but instead I kept thinking about the morning's unusual visitor and Robert's strange behavior. In 5 years of working at the agency, I'd developed a reliable instinct for reading the office atmosphere, and everything felt slightly off-kilter. My phone buzzed with a text message from Robert. "Can you come to my office when you get a chance? Need to discuss something important." The phrasing struck me as oddly formal. Normally, Robert would simply walk over to my desk or call out from his office doorway. Formal requests for meetings usually preceded either very good news or very bad news, and given the morning's strange energy, I found myself leaning toward the latter possibility. I finished my sandwich quickly and walked across the office toward Robert's corner office. The door was partially open, and I could see him sitting behind his desk with several manila folders spread in front of him. His usually confident posture seemed somehow diminished, and he was staring at the papers with the expression of someone wrestling with a difficult decision. "You wanted to see me?" I asked, knocking lightly on the doorframe. "Yes, come in, please. Close the door behind you." The request to close the door confirmed my suspicion that this conversation would be significant. In 5 years of working together, Robert had only asked me to close his office door during discussions about sensitive topics: salary negotiations, confidential client issues, or major company changes. I settled into the chair across from his desk, trying to read his expression for clues about what was coming. Robert had always been relatively transparent with his employees, sharing both challenges and successes with a directness that I appreciated. But today, he seemed to be struggling with how to begin whatever conversation he'd called me in to have. "Emma," he said finally, looking up from the papers with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, "I need to talk to you about some changes we're implementing in the company structure." The phrase "changes we're implementing" immediately set off alarm bells in my mind. In corporate speak, changes rarely meant good news for the people being informed about them rather than consulted on them. I kept my expression neutral and waited for him to continue. "The advertising industry is evolving rapidly," he continued, "and we need to position ourselves strategically for future growth. This means making some difficult decisions about personnel and department organization." I nodded, though I felt my stomach tightening with apprehension. The summer festival campaign alone would bring in more revenue than my entire department's annual salary costs, and our client retention rate had never been higher. If the company was struggling financially, I certainly hadn't seen evidence of it in our project budgets or performance metrics. "I've been evaluating our digital marketing operations," Robert said, shuffling through the papers on his desk. "And I've come to the conclusion that we need to bring in someone with a different skill set to lead that department moving forward." The words hit me like a physical blow, though I managed to keep my expression composed. In 5 years of building the digital marketing department from nothing into the company's most profitable division, I'd never received anything but positive feedback about my performance. My campaigns consistently exceeded client expectations, my team had the lowest turnover rate in the company, and our revenue numbers spoke for themselves. "I don't understand," I said carefully. "Has there been an issue with our department's performance? Our Q1 numbers are tracking 20% above projections." Robert shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding direct eye contact. "This isn't about performance, Emma. It's about strategic repositioning and bringing in fresh perspectives. Sometimes successful organizations need to make changes to continue growing." The explanation felt hollow, like corporate jargon designed to obscure rather than clarify. I'd seen Robert make difficult business decisions before, and he'd always been straightforward about the reasoning behind them. This evasiveness was entirely unlike him, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. "What exactly are you saying?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. "We'll be transitioning your responsibilities to someone else," he said, finally meeting my eyes. "I know this is unexpected, and I want you to know that this decision wasn't made lightly. You've been a valuable employee, and I'll be happy to provide excellent references for your job search." The phrase "job search" crystallized the reality I'd been trying to avoid accepting. I was being fired. After 5 years of building something I was genuinely proud of, after consistently exceeding every goal and expectation, after pouring my creativity and energy into making this company successful, I was being dismissed with corporate platitudes and empty promises of good references. "Who will be taking over the department?" I asked, surprised by how steady my voice sounded despite the chaos happening inside my chest. Robert hesitated for a moment, and in that hesitation, I saw something that looked almost like guilt. "Jessica will be joining us next week to assume leadership of the digital marketing operations." "Jessica?" "My daughter," he said quietly. "She recently graduated from Northwestern with a degree in marketing, and she's eager to apply her education in a practical setting." The pieces clicked into place with devastating clarity. The mysterious early morning visitor with her expensive clothes and calculating gaze hadn't been a potential client at all. She'd been conducting reconnaissance, evaluating the workspace she would soon inherit. The conversation I'd overheard about family obligations and making room for new opportunities suddenly made perfect sense. I was being fired so that Robert could give my job to his daughter. The realization was so absurd that I almost laughed. Jessica, whoever she was, would be inheriting a department built through 5 years of my labor, systems I'd developed, client relationships I'd cultivated, and team members I'd hired and trained. She would benefit from every late night I'd worked, every challenge I'd overcome, every innovation I'd implemented. Does Jessica have experience in digital marketing? I asked, though I suspected I already knew the answer. She's very bright, Robert said, which wasn't really an answer. And she brings fresh ideas and contemporary perspectives that I think will benefit our clients. Fresh ideas and contemporary perspectives. Code words for youth and inexperience dressed up to sound like advantages. I thought about Mrs. Chen's restaurant, still thriving because of the campaign strategy I'd developed specifically for her target demographic. I thought about Thompson's hardware store and the months I'd spent learning about their industry before creating their marketing plan. I thought about the summer festival campaign that would launch in 6 weeks, built on research and relationships that had taken years to develop. All of it would be handed over to someone who happened to share Robert's DNA. "When is my last day?" I asked, recognizing that there was no point in arguing or pleading. The decision had clearly been made, and nothing I could say would change Robert's mind about prioritizing his family over fairness or competence. "Friday," he said. "I know it's short notice, but Jessica is eager to get started, and we want to ensure a smooth transition. 4 days. I had 4 days to wrap up 5 years of work, brief someone with no relevant experience on projects that had taken months to develop, and prepare my team for leadership they hadn't chosen and might not respect. Will I have a chance to transition my active projects properly?" I asked. "Some of these campaigns have very specific requirements and timelines." "Of course," Robert said quickly, looking relieved that I was focusing on practical details rather than emotional responses. "I want to make sure all our clients continue receiving excellent service during the transition." I nodded, though I was already calculating how impossible it would be to properly transfer months of accumulated knowledge and relationship building in 4 days. The summer festival campaign alone involved 12 different stakeholders, 3 separate vendors, and a content calendar that extended through August. Jessica would be inheriting not just my job, but also the responsibility for delivering results on projects she had no role in creating. "I'll start preparing transition documents this afternoon," I said, standing up from my chair. "Is there anything specific you'd like me to focus on in terms of project handover?" "Just make sure everything is clearly documented," Robert said. "Jessica is very capable of learning quickly." As I walked back to my desk, I felt strangely disconnected from my body, as if I were watching someone else navigate this surreal situation. My colleagues were busy with their afternoon work, completely unaware that their department was about to undergo a dramatic change in leadership. Marcus was editing graphics for a restaurant client, Sarah was analyzing website traffic patterns, and Mike was on a call with a potential new client who had contacted us specifically because of our digital marketing reputation. All of this would continue without me. The work I'd poured my heart into for 5 years would go on, but under someone else's direction and receiving credit for outcomes I'd helped create. I sat down at my desk and opened a new document on my computer, staring at the blank page while trying to figure out where to begin documenting 5 years of accumulated knowledge. How do you summarize relationships with clients who trust you personally? How do you explain the intuitive understanding of what works for different industries that comes only from experience? How do you transfer the credibility you've built through consistent results to someone who has none of their own? The task felt overwhelming and ultimately futile, but I began typing anyway. If Jessica was going to inherit my work, she would at least have access to every piece of information I could provide. My team deserved that much, even if Robert's daughter didn't. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself studying my workspace with new eyes, seeing it as a collection of objects I would soon need to pack, rather than a space where I belonged. The succulent plant that had somehow thrived for 3 years would need a new home. The photo of my parents would go back into a box, waiting for the next office where I'd display it. The world's okayest marketer mug would be washed one final time and packed away with everything else that marked this space as mine. By 5 o'clock, most of my colleagues had left for the day, but I remained at my desk, working on transition documents and trying to process the emotional reality of what was happening. I'd built something here that mattered, not just to me but to the clients we served and the team members who depended on the work for their livelihoods. In 4 days, all of that would be transferred to someone whose primary qualification was her last name. The unfairness of it burned in my chest like acid, but underneath the anger was something else, a fierce determination not to let this define me. Robert could give my job to his daughter, but he couldn't take away the skills I'd developed, the experience I'd gained, or the reputation I'd built in the industry. Those things belonged to me, and I would carry them wherever I went next. I stayed in the office until nearly 7 that evening, writing detailed explanations of ongoing projects and trying to anticipate the questions someone with limited experience might need answered. As I finally gathered my things to leave, I took one last look around the space that had been my professional home for 5 years. Tomorrow I would begin the process of dismantling everything I'd built here, but tonight I would go home and start planning what I would build next. Because if there was one thing Robert had failed to understand in making his decision, it was that firing me didn't eliminate the competition for his daughter's success. It only relocated it. The drive home gave me time to think about how I would explain this situation to my parents, who had been so proud of my career progress at Westfield & Associates. They had attended company holiday parties, celebrated my promotions, and bragged to their friends about their daughter's success in the marketing industry. Now I would have to tell them that 5 years of hard work had been discarded to make room for the boss's daughter. But as I pulled into my apartment complex parking lot, I realized that wasn't the story I wanted to tell them. Instead, I would tell them about the opportunity this created, about the chance to build something even better than what I was leaving behind. After all, Jessica Westfield might have gotten my job, but she'd also just given me the motivation to ensure that 6 months from now, she'd be the one looking for work while I was the one conducting interviews. The game had changed, but it was far from over. The first thing I did after Robert's announcement was absolutely nothing. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes, engine off, hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The silence felt deafening after the noise of corporate pleasantries and transition timelines that had filled the afternoon. When I finally drove home, I didn't call my parents. I didn't text my friends. I didn't even cry, though I felt the pressure building behind my eyes like a storm waiting to break. Instead, I ordered Thai food, opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving for a promotion celebration that would never come, and did something I hadn't done since college. I researched my competition. Jessica Westfield had a surprisingly robust digital footprint for someone about to enter the professional world. Her LinkedIn profile displayed a Northwestern University marketing degree, a semester abroad in Barcelona, and internships at 2 Chicago agencies that specialized in lifestyle brands. Her Instagram account, set to public, showed exactly what I'd expected: expensive vacations, designer clothing, and the kind of curated perfection that comes from never worrying about money. But as I dug deeper, scrolling through years of posts and professional connections, a clearer picture emerged. Jessica had indeed completed internships, but they were at agencies where her father knew the owners personally. Her academic achievements were solid, but not exceptional. Her experience with actual clients appeared limited to supervised projects with predetermined outcomes. She was qualified on paper, but paper qualifications and real-world competence were entirely different things. More importantly, she had no experience with the specific challenges that made our client base unique. Small business owners don't need lifestyle branding and aspirational messaging. They need practical solutions that drive immediate results with limited budgets. They need someone who understands that every marketing dollar represents a significant investment, and that failure means more than disappointing a boss. It means potentially destroying someone's livelihood. I spent 3 hours that night creating a comprehensive analysis of our current client portfolio, identifying the specific expertise and relationships that would be essential for maintaining the accounts I'd built. Mrs. Chen's restaurant required understanding of cultural nuances in community marketing. Thompson's Hardware needed someone who could speak authentically about practical home improvement needs. The summer festival campaign demanded familiarity with municipal politics and volunteer coordination logistics. Jessica would inherit my job, but she would also inherit the responsibility for delivering results she had no experience achieving. The thought should have given me satisfaction, but instead it filled me with something closer to determination. These clients deserved better than being used as training wheels for someone learning the industry at their expense. The next morning, I arrived at the office with a plan that had crystallized during my sleepless night. If I had 4 days to transition 5 years of work, I would document everything so thoroughly that Jessica's inevitable failures couldn't be attributed to inadequate preparation. Every client file would include detailed notes about their business goals, preferred communication styles, and successful campaign strategies. Every ongoing project would have step-by-step instructions and contingency plans for common problems. I would give her every tool she needed to succeed, and when she failed anyway, the responsibility would be entirely her own. Marcus arrived first, as usual, carrying a coffee cup the size of a small pitcher and wearing headphones that suggested he was already mentally immersed in creative work. I'd hired him 3 years ago straight from art school. Initially attracted by his portfolio, but ultimately convinced by his ability to translate complex marketing concepts into visual elements that actually drove customer action. "Morning, Emma," he said, settling at his desk and immediately opening the design software that would occupy most of his day. "Ready for another thrilling Wednesday in paradise?" His casual tone made me realize that Robert hadn't announced my departure to the team yet. For Marcus, Sarah, and Mike, this was just another normal morning in a workplace where they felt valued and challenged. In a few hours, they would learn that their department was being transferred to someone they'd never met, someone whose qualifications were entirely unknown to them. The thought of their reactions, confusion, disappointment, possibly anger, made my chest tighten with a protective instinct I hadn't expected. I'd built this team carefully, hiring people who complemented each other's strengths and shared a commitment to delivering exceptional work. We'd developed workflows and communication patterns that maximized both efficiency and creativity. Jessica would inherit not just my position, but also the responsibility for maintaining the culture that made our department successful. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later, looking unusually flustered. Her normally perfect organization seemed slightly off-kilter, with papers protruding from her briefcase and her hair escaping from its carefully constructed bun. "Traffic was absolutely insane," she announced, dropping into her chair with visible relief. "There's construction on 5th Street that apparently started overnight without any warning." I sat in the same spot for 15 minutes. Mike emerged from the elevator carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing the slightly dazed expression that suggested he'd been up late working on freelance projects again. His dedication to the agency was absolute during business hours. But his true passion lay in experimental advertising campaigns for nonprofit organizations that couldn't afford traditional marketing services. "Extra shot day," he announced, offering Sarah the second coffee cup. "Figured if I was suffering through that traffic nightmare, you probably were too." These small gestures of consideration and mutual support characterized everything about our team dynamic. We'd learned each other's preferences, anticipated each other's needs, and developed the kind of professional intimacy that makes collaborative work genuinely enjoyable. Jessica would need months to understand these relationships, assuming she even recognized their importance. I spent the morning creating detailed project summaries while listening to my colleagues discuss weekend plans and current assignments with the easy familiarity of people who genuinely liked working together. Their conversations reminded me of everything I would miss about this job beyond the work itself. The shared jokes about difficult clients, the collaborative problem-solving sessions that turned into brainstorming marathons, the quiet pride we all felt when a campaign exceeded expectations. At 11:30, Robert's assistant sent an email requesting that the entire digital marketing team attend a brief meeting at noon. The formal tone and short notice confirmed my suspicion that he was finally ready to announce the change that would reshape everything my colleagues thought they knew about their professional future. We gathered in the small conference room adjacent to Robert's office, the space where we held our weekly team meetings and client presentations. I'd spent countless hours in this room, defending budget proposals, celebrating successful campaigns, and working through the creative challenges that made our job both frustrating and fulfilling. Robert entered carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of someone about to deliver news he'd rather avoid sharing. Behind him walked Jessica, dressed in what appeared to be a brand new business suit and carrying herself with the cautious confidence of someone trying to project authority she didn't yet possess. "I wanted to introduce everyone to Jessica Westfield," Robert began, his tone carefully neutral. "She'll be joining our team next week in a leadership capacity." I watched my colleagues' faces as they processed this information. Marcus looked confused, his eyes moving between Jessica and me as he tried to understand what leadership capacity meant for our existing structure. Sarah maintained her professional composure, but I caught the slight tightening around her eyes that indicated she was calculating implications. Mike simply looked tired, which probably had more to do with his late night than the current announcement. "Jessica recently graduated from Northwestern with a degree in marketing," Robert continued, "and she brings fresh perspectives and contemporary insights that will benefit our clients." The phrase "fresh perspectives and contemporary insights" was the same corporate speak he'd used with me the day before. Hearing it again, directed at my team members who had no context for understanding what it really meant, made my stomach clench with suppressed anger. "Will Jessica be working with our existing client accounts?" Sarah asked. Her question precisely the one I would have expected from someone whose analytical mind naturally focused on practical implications. "She'll be assuming responsibility for overall department leadership," Robert said, still avoiding any direct mention of my departure. "Emma will be transitioning out of her current role to pursue other opportunities." The euphemism, "transitioning out to pursue other opportunities," hung in the air like smoke from a fire nobody wanted to acknowledge. I saw Marcus blink twice, his expression shifting from confusion to something approaching alarm. Sarah's professional composure slipped just enough to reveal genuine concern. Mike set down his coffee cup with the careful precision of someone trying to process unexpected information. "When?" Marcus asked, the single word carrying more weight than entire sentences of corporate explanation. "Emma's last day will be Friday," Robert said. "Jessica will begin Monday, so there will be a brief overlap for transition purposes." Brief overlap. 4 days to transfer 5 years of institutional knowledge, client relationships, and team leadership to someone whose qualifications were entirely theoretical. The inadequacy of the timeline was so obvious that I almost admired Robert's ability to present it as a reasonable plan. "What about the summer festival campaign?" Mike asked, his practical mind immediately focusing on our most complex current project. "That launches in 6 weeks, and we're still coordinating with 12 different vendors." "Jessica will oversee the campaign completion," Robert said, with the confidence of someone who had no idea what the project actually entailed. "I'm sure the transition will be seamless." I looked at Jessica, who was listening to this conversation with an expression that suggested she was hearing about the summer festival campaign for the first time. Her slight frown indicated that she was beginning to understand the scope of responsibility she was inheriting, though I doubted she fully grasped the complexity of managing multiple stakeholder relationships while delivering results that would determine the agency's reputation in the community. "Will there be time for proper project briefings?" Sarah asked, her question directed at me rather than Robert. "Some of our current campaigns have very specific client requirements and historical context that might not be obvious from the files alone." Her question acknowledged what everyone in the room understood, but nobody wanted to say directly. 4 days was nowhere near enough time to properly transfer the knowledge necessary for maintaining our client relationships and campaign quality. "Emma will prepare comprehensive transition documents," Robert said, answering a question that hadn't been asked while avoiding the one that had been. "I'm confident that Jessica's education and fresh perspective will bring new energy to the department." Fresh perspective. The phrase grated against my nerves like sandpaper against skin. Our clients didn't need fresh perspectives. They needed experienced execution and proven results. They needed someone who understood that their marketing budgets represented real money with real consequences, not classroom exercises with predetermined outcomes. After the meeting ended and my colleagues dispersed with the shell-shocked expressions of people trying to process unwelcome change, I found myself alone with Jessica for the first time. She lingered in the conference room, studying the whiteboards where we mapped out campaign timelines and budget allocations. "This is a lot more complex than I expected," she said quietly, her voice lacking the confidence she'd projected during the meeting. Her admission surprised me. I'd anticipated defensiveness, or perhaps the kind of entitled enthusiasm that comes from never having failed at anything important. Instead, she seemed genuinely overwhelmed by the scope of responsibility she was inheriting. "It takes time to understand each client's specific needs," I said carefully, unsure whether to treat her as a colleague deserving professional courtesy or as the symbol of everything unfair about nepotism. "Every business has different challenges and different measures of success." Jessica nodded, still studying the whiteboards with an expression that suggested she was beginning to realize that marketing theory and marketing practice existed in entirely different universes. "How long did it take you to learn all of this?" she asked, gesturing toward the complex web of project timelines, client contacts, and vendor relationships mapped across multiple boards. 5 years, I said. "And I'm still learning." The conversation felt surreal, like providing strategy advice to someone who was about to occupy my office and inherit my work. But looking at Jessica's uncertain expression, I found myself feeling something unexpected. Sympathy for someone who was about to be set up for failure by her father's misguided favoritism. She didn't ask to inherit a department she wasn't qualified to lead. She didn't choose to be given responsibility that exceeded her experience. She was simply the beneficiary of nepotism that would ultimately hurt her as much as it hurt me, though in different ways. The rest of the week passed in a blur of frantic documentation and increasingly tense team meetings. I wrote detailed client profiles that included not just project specifications but also personal preferences, communication styles, and the relationship history that made our partnership successful. I created step-by-step guides for our most complex ongoing campaigns, complete with contingency plans for common problems and contact information for every vendor and stakeholder involved. Marcus, Sarah, and Mike approached the transition with professional grace that barely concealed their personal concern. They asked thoughtful questions about maintaining client relationships, offered to help with documentation efforts, and made subtle inquiries about my future plans that indicated they were considering their own options as well. "You know," Sarah said during a quiet moment on Thursday afternoon, "there are other agencies in town that would be lucky to have someone with your experience." Her comment wasn't quite a suggestion that I consider starting my own company, but it wasn't not that suggestion either. I filed the thought away with everything else I was learning about the opportunities that crisis can create for people willing to think strategically rather than reactively. Friday morning arrived with the finality of a closing door. I packed my personal belongings into the same cardboard box that had held my transition documents, said goodbye to colleagues who promised to stay in touch, and took one last look at the workspace I'd called home for 5 years. Jessica was scheduled to start the following Monday, which meant she would inherit not just my position but also my team's loyalty, my client relationships, and the reputation I'd built through thousands of hours of dedicated work. She would also inherit the pressure to maintain standards she'd had no role in establishing and deliver results she'd never achieved independently. As I carried my box toward the elevator, I realized that Robert had given me something valuable without meaning to. Complete freedom to build whatever came next without the constraints of someone else's vision or limitations. Jessica might have my old job, but I had something more important. I had motivation. The weekend gave me time to process the emotional reality of my situation while beginning to plan my next steps strategically rather than reactively. I researched competitor agencies, analyzed market opportunities, and began drafting a business plan for something I'd never seriously considered before: starting my own company. The idea had been abstract until now, more fantasy than realistic possibility. But sitting in my apartment with 5 years of industry experience and a comprehensive understanding of what clients actually needed versus what they were currently receiving, the concept began to feel not just possible but inevitable. I had relationships with freelance designers, copywriters, and developers who could provide specialized expertise without the overhead costs of full-time employees. I had knowledge of exactly which marketing strategies worked for different types of businesses and which approaches wasted money without delivering results. Most importantly, I had personal credibility with potential clients who had seen my work and trusted my judgment. Sunday evening, I created a simple website and business registration for Rodriguez Marketing Solutions. The name was straightforward, professional, and entirely mine. No corporate hierarchy, no arbitrary decision-making, no family favoritism determining who received opportunities and recognition. Just me, my experience, and the chance to prove that competence matters more than connections. Monday morning, while Jessica was presumably settling into my former office and trying to understand the complexities she'd inherited, I was making phone calls to former clients whose contracts with Westfield and Associates had recently expired. My conversations were carefully professional, focused on their current marketing needs rather than any criticism of my former employer. Mrs. Chen answered on the second ring, her voice immediately warm with recognition. "Emma, how wonderful to hear from you. How are things at the agency?" "Actually, I've recently started my own marketing consultancy," I said, surprised by how natural the words sounded. "I wanted to reach out because I know your summer promotional campaign will be launching soon, and I'd love to discuss how I might be able to help." The conversation that followed reminded me why I'd fallen in love with marketing in the first place. Mrs. Chen had specific challenges that required creative solutions, limited resources that demanded efficient strategies, and genuine enthusiasm for her business that made every success feel personal. These were the clients I'd built my reputation serving, and these were the people who would determine whether my new venture succeeded or failed. By the end of the week, I had 3 consulting contracts, a shared office space in a building 2 blocks from Westfield and Associates, and a growing sense that leaving my old job might have been the best thing that could have happened to my career. Jessica, according to industry gossip that reached me through former colleagues, was struggling with the transition in exactly the ways I'd predicted. The summer festival campaign was behind schedule, 2 clients had expressed concerns about communication delays, and the team was working longer hours to compensate for leadership gaps. I felt no satisfaction in hearing about these struggles. If anything, I felt frustrated that talented colleagues were suffering the consequences of decisions they'd had no voice in making. But I also felt increasingly confident that the foundation I was building for Rodriguez Marketing Solutions was solid enough to support the growth I was already planning. 3 weeks after my departure from Westfield and Associates, I received a phone call that would change everything I thought I knew about competition, justice, and the power of patience. "Emma?" The voice was tentative, almost hesitant. "This is Jessica Westfield. I was wondering if we could meet for coffee. I have something I'd like to discuss with you." The request surprised me, though in retrospect, it probably shouldn't have. Jessica had inherited responsibility without adequate preparation, a team she hadn't built, and client relationships she'd had no role in developing. She was discovering that nepotism could get you a position but couldn't give you the competence necessary to excel in that position. We met at a neutral coffee shop downtown, a space where neither of us held territorial advantage. Jessica arrived looking far less polished than she had during our brief interactions at the agency. Her confidence seemed genuinely shaken, and she carried herself with the uncertainty of someone confronting her own limitations for the first time. "I want to apologize," she said without preamble, once we'd settled at a corner table with our drinks. "I know this whole situation was unfair to you, and I'm starting to understand just how unfair it really was." Her directness caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness or perhaps an attempt to justify her father's decision. Instead, she seemed genuinely remorseful and increasingly aware of the complexity she'd inherited. "The summer festival campaign is falling apart," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've tried to follow your notes, but there are so many relationships and details that aren't documented anywhere. The vendors are confused, the client is frustrated, and my team is working overtime to fix problems I don't even understand." I listened without offering immediate advice, curious about where this conversation was heading and what Jessica hoped to accomplish by meeting with me. "I know I don't have any right to ask you this," she said, "but would you consider consulting on the festival campaign, just until we can get things stabilized? I can pay you personally if necessary." The request hung between us like a bridge neither of us was sure we wanted to cross. Jessica was essentially admitting that she couldn't handle the job she'd inherited, while I was being offered the chance to rescue work I'd initiated but no longer officially owned. "Why would you want my help?" I asked. "Isn't the whole point of bringing in fresh perspectives that you don't need the old approaches?" Jessica winced at my words, recognizing her father's language reflected back at her with surgical precision. "The fresh perspectives aren't working," she said quietly. I'm realizing that there's a difference between understanding marketing theory and actually managing client relationships. I'm good at the strategic planning and creative development, but I have no idea how to navigate the personal dynamics that seem to make everything else possible. Her admission revealed something important about both her character and her limitations. Jessica wasn't incompetent, but she was inexperienced in ways that mattered enormously for the specific challenges of our client base. She could develop beautiful campaigns, but she couldn't build the trust necessary to implement them successfully. "What does your father think about you reaching out to me?" I asked. "He doesn't know," Jessica said quickly, "and I'd prefer to keep it that way, at least until I figure out how to handle this situation." The secrecy of her request told me everything I needed to know about the dynamics at Westfield and Associates. Robert had created a problem he couldn't solve, his daughter was drowning in responsibilities she wasn't prepared for, and my former team was paying the price for decisions made without considering practical consequences. I could have walked away. I could have let Jessica fail spectacularly and used her failure as evidence of what happens when competence is subordinated to favoritism. But looking at her across the coffee shop table, I realized that helping her succeed might actually serve my interests better than watching her fail. "I'll consult on the festival campaign," I said finally. "But I have conditions." Jessica nodded eagerly, clearly relieved that I was willing to consider her request. "First, this is a professional relationship. You pay my consulting rate, which is significantly higher than what I was earning as your employee. Second, I work directly with the vendors and stakeholders I have relationships with. Third, when the campaign succeeds, you give me full credit for the rescue and provide written recommendations that I can use for future business development." The terms were more generous to me than they were to her, but Jessica agreed without hesitation. She needed my expertise more than I needed her approval, and we both understood that the power dynamic between us had shifted fundamentally. Over the following month, I worked as an external consultant to save the summer festival campaign, while simultaneously building my own client base and developing Rodriguez Marketing Solutions into a legitimate competitor. The irony of being paid to fix problems created by my own replacement wasn't lost on me, but the arrangement served multiple purposes beyond immediate revenue. Working with my former team as an outside expert gave me insight into exactly how Westfield and Associates was struggling in my absence. Jessica was indeed talented at strategic planning and creative development, but she lacked the relationship management skills that made complex campaigns successful. The team respected her intellect but missed the leadership style I'd developed over 5 years of working together. More importantly, every vendor, stakeholder, and client involved in the festival campaign was reminded of my capabilities and availability for future projects. I wasn't actively soliciting business during our professional interactions, but I was demonstrating competence in ways that would influence their decisions when future marketing needs arose. The festival campaign launched successfully, largely because I was able to leverage existing relationships and institutional knowledge that Jessica couldn't access independently. The client was satisfied, the vendors were paid on time, and the community event proceeded without the marketing disasters that had seemed inevitable just weeks earlier. Jessica, to her credit, honored our agreement completely. She provided written testimonials that emphasized my role in the campaign's success, recommended my services to other potential clients, and never claimed credit for work she hadn't done. Her integrity in acknowledging my contributions impressed me and suggested that her character was stronger than her father's decision-making process. But the most significant outcome of our collaboration wasn't the immediate success of the festival campaign. It was the conversation that followed our final project meeting, when Jessica made a request that would reshape both of our professional trajectories in ways neither of us could have anticipated. "I've been thinking about my situation at the agency," she said as we walked toward our cars after celebrating the successful campaign launch, "and I don't think I'm going to stay." Her statement surprised me, though in retrospect I should have seen it coming. Jessica had experienced firsthand the difference between being given a position and earning one, and she'd learned that inheriting someone else's work was more burden than privilege. "What will you do?" I asked. "I was hoping," she said, stopping beside her car and turning to face me directly, "that you might consider hiring me." The request was so unexpected that I almost laughed. 6 weeks earlier, Jessica had inherited my job through nepotism. Now she was asking to work for me as an employee of the company I'd built from nothing. "Why would you want to work for Rodriguez Marketing Solutions?" I asked. Because I want to learn how to do this job properly, she said simply. Working with you on the festival campaign showed me what I don't know, and I'd rather learn from someone who actually knows what they're doing than continue struggling with responsibilities I wasn't prepared for. Her honesty was refreshing, but her request created complications I wasn't sure I wanted to navigate. Hiring Robert Westfield's daughter would send a message to the industry about my company, though I wasn't certain what that message would be. It would also mean working closely with someone whose family connections had directly impacted my career trajectory. I can't pay you what your father was paying you, I said. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions is still a startup, and our salary structure reflects that reality. I don't care about the money, Jessica said quickly. I care about learning to do this work well. I've realized that getting a job through family connections might get you a title, but it doesn't give you the competence to deserve that title. Her response suggested that our collaboration had taught her something valuable about the difference between privilege and capability. She was essentially asking to start over, to earn through merit what she'd previously received through nepotism. 2 weeks later, Jessica Westfield became the first official employee of Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, hired not because of who her father was, but despite who her father was. Her decision to leave Westfield & Associates created exactly the kind of industry buzz that money couldn't buy for a startup marketing consultancy. Within a month, 3 of my former colleagues had submitted applications to join Rodriguez Marketing Solutions. Within 6 months, we had secured 8 major clients and established ourselves as a serious competitor to established agencies throughout the region. And exactly 6 months after Robert Westfield fired me to make room for his daughter, Jessica Westfield was sitting across from me in my conference room, interviewing candidates for a marketing coordinator position at the company I'd built from the ashes of my former career. The circle was complete, but the story was just beginning. The phone call came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly projections in my new corner office. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had grown from a desperate startup to a legitimate competitor in 18 months. And our success had apparently attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Emma Rodriguez? The voice was unfamiliar, crisp with the authority of someone accustomed to having their calls returned promptly. Speaking. This is Margaret Chen, senior partner at Chen Williams & Associates. We're the legal firm representing Westfield & Associates. I need to schedule a meeting with you regarding some business matters that require immediate attention. The formal tone and legal representation immediately put me on alert. Robert Westfield had never contacted me directly since my departure, and having his attorney reach out suggested complications I hadn't anticipated. What kind of business matters? I asked, switching to the careful tone I'd learned to use when conversations might have legal implications. Client poaching allegations and potential contract violations, Margaret said without preamble. Mr. Westfield believes your business practices have crossed ethical boundaries, and he's prepared to pursue legal action if we can't resolve this matter through direct negotiation. Client poaching. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't realized was burning. Every client relationship I developed had been built through legitimate business practices, transparent communication, and delivering results that justified their investment in my services. I'm not aware of any contract violations, I said carefully. All of my client relationships have been established through standard industry practices. Mr. Westfield disagrees, Margaret replied. He believes you've systematically targeted his clients using insider knowledge gained during your employment at his agency. He's documented several instances where clients terminated their contracts with Westfield & Associates shortly after beginning work with your company. The implication was clear. Robert was claiming that I'd used my knowledge of his client base to steal business that rightfully belonged to him. The accusation was both predictable and deeply unfair, but I understood why he was making it. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had grown too successful too quickly for him to ignore, and our success was apparently affecting his bottom line in ways that threatened his business model. I'd be happy to meet with you to discuss Mr. Westfield's concerns, I said, already calculating the legal expenses this situation might require. When would be convenient? Tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Our office is downtown. And Ms. Rodriguez? Margaret's voice carried a warning that was probably intended to intimidate me. "I'd suggest you bring legal representation. This isn't a casual conversation." After hanging up, I sat in my office trying to process the implications of Robert's legal threat. Every business decision I'd made had been carefully considered and ethically sound, but I also understood that perception and reality weren't always the same thing in legal disputes. Jessica knocked on my office door frame, carrying 2 coffee cups and wearing the expression of someone who'd overheard enough of my phone conversation to understand that trouble was developing. "Legal problems?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk and offering me one of the coffee cups. "Your father thinks I've been stealing his clients," I said, accepting the coffee gratefully. "He's threatening legal action if I don't stop what he considers unethical business practices." Jessica's expression darkened with something that looked like embarrassment, mixed with anger. In the year she'd been working for Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, she'd consistently demonstrated integrity that contrasted sharply with her father's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain his competitive position. "Which clients is he talking about specifically?" she asked. I pulled up our client database and reviewed the accounts we'd acquired over the past 18 months. Thompson's Hardware had approached us after their contract with Westfield and Associates expired. Mrs. Chen's restaurant had sought our services when Robert failed to renew their agreement in a timely manner. 3 other businesses had contacted us independently after hearing about our work through word-of-mouth referrals. "All of these relationships developed organically," I said, showing Jessica the timeline of client acquisitions. "Nobody terminated an existing contract with your father's agency to work with us. They either came to us after their contracts expired naturally, or they were referred by other satisfied clients." Jessica studied the information with the analytical precision she'd developed during her time working for me. Her marketing education had provided theoretical knowledge, but working at Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had taught her the practical skills necessary for building sustainable client relationships. "He's probably seeing correlation and assuming causation," she said finally. "Your success coincides with his struggles, so he's blaming you for problems that might have other explanations." Her assessment was probably accurate, but it didn't address the immediate problem of defending against legal accusations that could damage our reputation and drain resources we needed for business development. "The real question," I said, "is whether his legal threats have any merit. I've been careful to follow industry standards and avoid any practices that could be considered unethical, but that doesn't mean he can't create expensive problems for us." Jessica set down her coffee cup with the deliberate precision of someone making a difficult decision. "I want to testify on your behalf," she said quietly. "If this goes to any kind of formal proceeding, I can provide testimony about your business practices and character. I've worked closely with you for a year, and I've never seen you do anything that could be considered client poaching or contract violation." Her offer surprised me, though I should have anticipated it. Jessica had developed genuine loyalty to Rodriguez Marketing Solutions and personal respect for the way we conducted business. But testifying against her father's legal claims would create family complications that extended far beyond our professional relationship. "That could make things difficult with your family," I said. "My family made things difficult when my father fired you to give me a job I wasn't qualified for," Jessica replied with more steel in her voice than I'd ever heard before. "I've spent the last year learning what ethical business practices actually look like, and I'm not going to let him destroy what you've built with false accusations." The legal meeting took place in a downtown conference room that was clearly designed to intimidate. Margaret Chen commanded the space with the confidence of someone who'd conducted thousands of similar negotiations, while Robert sat beside her looking simultaneously angry and uncomfortable. I'd hired Patricia Valdez, a business attorney who specialized in marketing industry disputes, to represent my interests. Patricia's reputation for thorough preparation and aggressive advocacy had cost me more than I'd budgeted for legal expenses, but her presence immediately shifted the dynamic in ways that suggested the investment was worthwhile. "Mr. Westfield," Patricia began without preamble, "my client is prepared to address your concerns about business practices, but will need you to be specific about which actions you consider problematic and what evidence you have to support your allegations." Robert's presentation lasted 45 minutes and covered every client relationship Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had developed since our founding. He claimed that my insider knowledge of his business operations gave me unfair advantage in competing for contracts. He argued that my hiring of Jessica constituted a deliberate attempt to access confidential information about his agency's strategies. He suggested that our success was built on unethical practices that violated industry standards. His arguments were passionate, but largely circumstantial. He could demonstrate that some of his former clients now worked with my company, but he couldn't prove that I'd actively solicited them while they were under contract with his agency. He could show that our growth had coincided with his business challenges, but correlation wasn't evidence of causation. More importantly, his accusations revealed the fundamental weakness in his position. He was essentially arguing that competition itself was unethical when it came from someone who'd previously worked for him. "Mr. Westfield," Patricia said when he'd finished his presentation, "are you claiming that Ms. Rodriguez should be prohibited from working in the marketing industry because she was once your employee? Are you suggesting that her knowledge of standard business practices constitutes some kind of trade secret violation?" "I'm suggesting," Robert said, his voice rising with frustration, "that she systematically targeted my clients using information she gained while working for me, and that this constitutes unfair business competition." Patricia opened her briefcase and removed a thick folder containing documentation I'd helped prepare over the previous week. "Let's examine the specific client relationships you've mentioned," she said, spreading papers across the conference table. "Thompson's hardware store approached Rodriguez Marketing Solutions 6 months after their contract with your agency expired. Mrs. Chen's restaurant contacted my client after you failed to return their calls about contract renewal for 3 weeks. Morrison Manufacturing sought our services after being referred by another satisfied client who had no previous relationship with Westfield and Associates." Each example Patricia cited demonstrated that our client relationships had developed through legitimate business practices rather than aggressive poaching or unethical solicitation. The documentation showed timing, communication records, and referral sources that contradicted Robert's narrative about systematic client theft. "Furthermore," Patricia continued, "my client's hiring of your daughter was done at Ms. Westfield's request, after she voluntarily left your agency to seek employment elsewhere. Are you claiming that your daughter's decision to change jobs somehow constitutes corporate espionage?" The question hung in the air with the weight of its obvious answer. Robert couldn't argue that Jessica's employment choices were part of my business strategy without suggesting that his own daughter was somehow disloyal or incompetent. "Jessica has access to confidential information about my business operations," Robert said weakly. "Her employment with a competitor creates obvious conflicts of interest." "What confidential information?" Patricia asked. "Marketing strategies that are standard throughout the industry? Client communication preferences that any competent professional would develop through normal business relationships? Are you claiming ownership of general business practices that every marketing agency uses?" Margaret Chen, Robert's attorney, had remained silent throughout this exchange, but I could see her calculating the legal weaknesses in her client's position. Robert's accusations were emotionally satisfying, but legally insufficient to support the kind of action he wanted to pursue. "Mr. Westfield," Margaret said carefully, "perhaps we should discuss alternative approaches to resolving your concerns. Legal action requires clear evidence of specific violations, and the documentation we've seen today doesn't support claims of client poaching or contract violations." Robert's face reddened with the frustration of someone watching his preferred narrative collapse under scrutiny. He'd expected to intimidate me into abandoning successful business practices, but instead he was learning that legitimate competition couldn't be stopped through legal threats. "This isn't over," he said, gathering his papers with angry movements. "Rodriguez Marketing Solutions has grown too quickly to be entirely legitimate, and I'm going to prove that your success is built on practices that violate industry ethics." Patricia remained calm in the face of Robert's hostility, responding with the professional composure that made her worth every dollar of her substantial fees. "Mr. Westfield, if you have evidence of actual wrongdoing, we encourage you to present it through appropriate channels. However, continuing to make unfounded accusations could constitute harassment or defamation, and those are legal issues that my client would be prepared to address aggressively." The threat of counter-litigation effectively ended the meeting. Robert and Margaret left without achieving any of their stated objectives, while Patricia and I remained to discuss the implications of what we just experienced. He'll probably continue making noise about unfair competition, Patricia said, but he doesn't have a legal case that would survive preliminary review. His real problem isn't your business practices, it's that he can't compete effectively with the service quality you're providing. Her assessment proved accurate over the following months. Robert continued complaining about Rodriguez Marketing Solutions to anyone who would listen, but his accusations carried decreasing credibility as our reputation for ethical business practices became established throughout the industry. More significantly, his legal threats had exactly the opposite effect from what he'd intended. Instead of intimidating me into reducing my competitive efforts, the experience convinced me that Rodriguez Marketing Solutions needed to accelerate our growth to establish market position that would be impossible for Robert to challenge. I spent the next 6 months implementing an expansion strategy that transformed my small consultancy into a legitimate threat to established agencies throughout the region. We hired 3 additional full-time employees, moved to larger office space, and began pursuing contracts with larger clients who represented more substantial revenue opportunities. The most important hire was David Kim, a senior strategist who'd left a prestigious Chicago agency to join our team. David brought relationships with corporate clients, experience with multi-million-dollar campaigns, and the kind of industry credibility that elevated our entire company's reputation. "I've been watching what you've built here," David said during his first week with the company, "and I'm impressed by the culture you've created. This feels like the kind of place where good work gets recognized and talented people can actually advance based on merit." His comment reminded me of everything I'd tried to create at Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, a workplace where competence mattered more than connections, where employees felt valued for their contributions rather than their compliance, where success was shared rather than hoarded by management. Jessica had become our account manager for mid-sized business clients, a role that utilized her strategic planning strengths while allowing her to develop the relationship management skills she'd been learning since joining our team. Her growth had been remarkable to watch, transforming from someone who'd inherited responsibilities she wasn't prepared for into someone who'd earned authority through demonstrated competence. "I've been thinking about my career trajectory," Jessica said during one of our monthly performance reviews. "And I want you to know that working here has taught me things about business that I never could have learned at my father's agency." "Such as?" "That earning respect is more satisfying than inheriting position," she said. "That building something from nothing requires different skills than managing something that already exists. That competence and character matter more than family connections or educational credentials." Her insights reflected personal growth that extended far beyond professional development. Jessica had learned to distinguish between privilege and achievement, between being given opportunities and deserving them. The real test of our company's development came when Morrison Manufacturing, one of the largest businesses in our region, invited Rodriguez Marketing Solutions to bid on their comprehensive rebranding campaign. The project represented more revenue than we'd generated in our first year of operation, and winning it would establish us as a major player in the regional marketing industry. The competition for the Morrison contract included Westfield and Associates and 3 other established agencies with significantly more resources and longer track records than ours. We were clearly the underdog, but we also had advantages that our competitors couldn't match: intimate knowledge of local business culture, proven success with practical marketing challenges, and a team that was genuinely excited about the opportunity to prove our capabilities on a larger scale. David led our pitch preparation with the strategic thinking that had made him valuable to Chicago clients, while Jessica coordinated research that demonstrated our understanding of Morrison's specific challenges and opportunities. The entire team contributed ideas that reflected both creative innovation and practical implementation knowledge. Our presentation to Morrison's executive team lasted 2 hours and covered everything from brand positioning strategy to detailed budget allocations for a 12-month campaign timeline. We demonstrated not just what we would do for their company, but exactly how we would do it, and why our approach would deliver measurable results. "What sets Rodriguez Marketing Solutions apart from other agencies?" asked Helen Morrison, the company's CEO, and the 3rd generation of her family to lead the business. "We understand that marketing isn't about impressing other marketing professionals," I said. "It's about connecting your business with customers who need what you're offering. Every strategy we develop focuses on driving real results rather than winning industry awards." Helen nodded, clearly appreciating the distinction between marketing that served business objectives and marketing that served creative egos. And why should we trust a relatively new agency with a project this significant? Asked Tom Morrison, Helen's brother, and the company's operations director. Jessica answered before I could respond, speaking with confidence that reflected her year of experience building client relationships. Because we're not just another agency to you, she said. We're a local business that understands local challenges. Your success directly impacts our success, so we have personal investment in delivering results that justify your confidence in us. Her response demonstrated exactly the kind of authentic client relationship thinking that had made Rodriguez Marketing Solutions successful. We weren't trying to impress Morrison Manufacturing with corporate sophistication. We were offering partnership based on shared interests and mutual respect. 3 weeks later, Helen Morrison called to inform us that Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had won the contract. The news felt surreal, like validation of everything we'd worked to build since my departure from Westfield & Associates. Your proposal was the most thorough we received, Helen said, and your team demonstrated understanding of our business that the other agencies couldn't match. We're excited to begin working together. Winning the Morrison contract transformed Rodriguez Marketing Solutions from a successful startup into a legitimate competitor for major regional businesses. The project timeline would require expanding our team, upgrading our technology infrastructure, and establishing operational systems that could handle significantly increased complexity. But more importantly, our success with Morrison Manufacturing would demonstrate to the entire industry that Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had evolved beyond competing with small agencies like Westfield & Associates. We were now positioned to challenge established firms throughout the region. The day we signed the Morrison contract, I received a voice message from Robert Westfield that revealed exactly how our success was affecting his business. Emma. His voice carried a mixture of anger and desperation that I'd never heard before. I know you think you've won something by stealing my clients and hiring my daughter, but this isn't over. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions is built on practices that won't survive industry scrutiny, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly how you've achieved your success. His threat felt empty compared to the substantial contract I'd just signed, and the team of talented professionals I'd assembled. Robert was still fighting battles that had been decided months ago, while I was focused on opportunities that would determine our success over the coming years. Jessica had been in the office when Robert's message arrived, and she listened to it with an expression that mixed embarrassment with disappointment. "I'm sorry he's still acting this way," she said quietly. "I know his behavior reflects poorly on our family, and I don't want his problems to create complications for the company." "His problems aren't your responsibility," I said. "You've earned your position here through your own work, and nothing he says or does can change that." But Robert's escalating hostility was beginning to affect more than just our professional relationship. Industry gossip suggested that he was actively discouraging other agencies from collaborating with Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, spreading rumors about our business practices, and generally trying to damage our reputation through whisper campaigns rather than direct competition. His behavior was becoming increasingly desperate and potentially self-destructive. But it was also creating challenges that I needed to address strategically rather than reactively. 2 months into the Morrison Manufacturing campaign, I made a decision that would define the next phase of Rodriguez Marketing Solutions development. We would expand beyond regional markets and begin competing for clients throughout the Midwest. The expansion strategy required significant investment in talent, technology, and marketing infrastructure. But it also represented the best way to insulate our business from Robert's local influence and establish market position that would be impossible for him to threaten. David Kim led our expansion planning with the same strategic precision he'd brought to client campaign development. Jessica coordinated operational logistics while continuing to manage her existing client relationships. The rest of our team embraced the challenge of scaling successful practices to serve larger markets and more complex client needs. 6 months later, Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had offices in 3 cities, 12 full-time employees, and contracts with clients whose combined revenue exceeded the entire gross income of Westfield & Associates. We'd evolved from a startup consultancy into a legitimate regional marketing firm, and our success was attracting attention from industry publications, potential investors, and talented professionals who wanted to join a company where merit determined advancement. The transformation felt remarkable, but the most satisfying moment came during a chance encounter at an industry conference where I hadn't expected to see anyone from my former professional life. Robert Westfield approached me during a networking reception, looking older and more worn than I remembered from our legal confrontation. His agency had apparently struggled to replace the clients they'd lost to various competitors, and the strain of declining business was visible in his demeanor. "Emma," he said, his voice lacking the hostility I'd grown accustomed to hearing, "I wanted to apologize for how I handled your departure from the agency and the legal complications that followed." His unexpected contrition surprised me, though I wasn't sure whether it represented genuine regret or strategic positioning for some purpose I couldn't yet understand. "I made decisions based on family loyalty rather than business judgment," he continued, "and those decisions ultimately hurt both my company and my relationship with Jessica. I'm hoping we might be able to establish a more professional relationship going forward." The conversation felt surreal, like closure for conflicts I'd moved beyond months earlier. Robert's acknowledgement of his mistakes was satisfying, but it also reminded me how much energy I'd wasted being angry about situations I couldn't control instead of focusing on opportunities I could create. "I appreciate your apology," I said carefully. "I hope Westfield and Associates finds the right path forward for your business and your family." Our conversation lasted only a few minutes, but it represented a fundamental shift in the dynamic between us. Robert was no longer the powerful employer who could arbitrarily terminate my career. He was a competitor struggling to adapt to industry changes that had left his business model increasingly obsolete. As I walked away from that conversation, I realized that revenge had never been the point of building Rodriguez Marketing Solutions. Justice wasn't about punishing Robert for his poor decisions. It was about proving that competence and character ultimately matter more than connections and nepotism. The real victory wasn't that I'd succeeded, despite his efforts to limit my opportunities. The real victory was that I'd built something valuable, sustainable, and meaningful from the ashes of what he'd tried to destroy. And in exactly 18 months, Jessica Westfield would be conducting interviews for senior marketing positions at Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, while her father continued struggling to maintain relevance in an industry that had moved beyond the practices that had once made his agency successful. The circle was closing, but the story was expanding in directions none of us could have anticipated when it all began with a simple phrase: "We're making some changes to the department structure." The morning everything changed started with an unexpected email in my inbox from someone I'd never heard of. Amanda Richardson, Executive Vice President of Strategic Acquisitions at Meridian Marketing Group, was requesting a confidential meeting to discuss what she called mutually beneficial business opportunities. Meridian was one of the largest marketing conglomerates in the Midwest, the kind of company that acquired successful regional agencies to expand their footprint and capabilities. I stared at the email for several minutes, trying to process what it might mean. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had grown beyond my wildest expectations over the past 2 years. But we were still a relatively small operation compared to the corporate giants that dominated the industry. The idea that Meridian would be interested in acquiring us felt both thrilling and terrifying. Jessica knocked on my office door, carrying her laptop and wearing the focused expression that meant she'd discovered something important during her morning research. "Have you heard anything about Westfield and Associates recently?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Not since your father's apology at the conference last year." "Why?" "I've been monitoring industry publications for competitive intelligence, and there are some concerning rumors circulating about their financial situation." Jessica opened her laptop and showed me several articles from trade publications that covered the regional marketing industry. The headlines told a story of systematic decline that was apparently accelerating rather than stabilizing. Local agency struggles with client retention, Westfield and Associates downsizes staff amid revenue shortfall, and industry veterans question traditional agency model viability, painted a picture of a business in serious trouble. "How bad is it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "Bad enough that they've had to lay off 6 people in the past 4 months, Jessica said quietly. "Sarah Martinez and Mike Thompson both reached out to me about potential opportunities here. Apparently the atmosphere at the agency has become pretty toxic, as everyone worries about job security." Sarah and Mike had been valuable members of my original team at Westfield and Associates, colleagues I'd genuinely enjoyed working with and respected for their professional competence. The thought of them struggling in an increasingly unstable workplace made me feel protective in ways I hadn't expected. Are they interested in joining Rodriguez Marketing Solutions? I asked. Very interested. They've been following our growth, and they know the kind of workplace culture we've built here. Sarah specifically mentioned that she missed working in an environment where people felt valued rather than expendable. The irony wasn't lost on me that former colleagues from my old job were now seeking employment at the company I'd built after being fired to make room for nepotism. But more than irony, their interest represented an opportunity to reunite talented professionals who'd worked well together and shared similar values about what made business relationships successful. Schedule interviews with both of them, I said. If they're genuinely interested in joining our team, and they still maintain the professional standards I remember, we should seriously consider hiring them. Jessica made notes on her laptop, but I could see her calculating implications that extended beyond simple hiring decisions. Emma, she said carefully, there's something else you should know about my father's situation. The rumors suggest that Westfield and Associates might be facing bankruptcy within the next 6 months if they can't turn things around quickly. Bankruptcy. The word carried weight that went far beyond business failure. Robert Westfield had built his agency over 15 years, establishing relationships and reputation that represented his entire professional identity. The possibility of losing everything he'd worked for would be devastating in ways that transcended simple financial loss. How do you feel about that? I asked Jessica, recognizing that her father's potential business failure created complicated emotional territory for someone who'd chosen to work for his competitor. Conflicted, she admitted. I'm angry about the decisions he made that led to this situation, but I don't want to see him lose everything. He made mistakes, but he's still my father. Her response reflected the emotional maturity she developed during her time at Rodriguez Marketing Solutions. Jessica had learned to separate personal relationships from professional judgment, but she hadn't lost her capacity for compassion even towards someone whose poor decisions had affected her own career trajectory. The situation with Westfield and Associates made my meeting with Amanda Richardson feel even more significant. If Meridian Marketing Group was seriously interested in acquiring Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, the timing couldn't be more perfect for establishing our long-term stability and growth potential. 3 days later, I found myself in Meridian's downtown offices, surrounded by the kind of corporate sophistication that represented everything I'd never thought I wanted for my business. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city. Conference rooms featured technology that probably cost more than my first year's revenue, and everyone moved with the polished efficiency of people who dealt in millions rather than thousands. Amanda Richardson commanded the space with the confidence of someone who'd orchestrated dozens of similar acquisitions. She was probably in her early 50s, impeccably dressed, and carried herself with the authority that comes from consistently achieving difficult objectives. Ms. Rodriguez, she began, Meridian has been tracking the performance of regional marketing agencies throughout the Midwest, and Rodriguez Marketing Solutions has caught our attention for several reasons. She opened a presentation that detailed our growth metrics, client retention rates, and market penetration statistics with an accuracy that suggested very thorough research into our business operations. Your revenue growth has been exceptional, but what really interests us is your client satisfaction scores and employee retention rates. Those metrics indicate that you've built something sustainable rather than just achieved short-term success. I listened to her analysis while trying to process the implications of what she was proposing. Meridian wasn't just interested in acquiring our client base or absorbing our revenue stream. They wanted to preserve and scale the business culture that had made Rodriguez Marketing Solutions successful. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. Full acquisition with retention of your existing management structure and operational autonomy, Amanda said. You would become a Meridian subsidiary, but you'd continue operating under your own brand with full authority over hiring, client relationships, and strategic direction. The offer was more generous than I'd expected and more appealing than I'd thought possible. Meridian would provide capital for expansion, corporate resources for complex projects, and market credibility that would open doors to clients we couldn't reach independently. But I would retain control over the company culture and business practices that had made our success possible. What's the timeline for a decision? I asked. We'd like to move quickly if you're interested, Amanda said. The marketing industry is consolidating rapidly, and opportunities like this become less available as larger players establish market dominance. The pressure to decide quickly was probably strategic, but it also reflected the reality of corporate acquisition dynamics. Companies like Meridian made multiple offers and pursued the opportunities that developed most efficiently. I told Amanda I would need time to consult with my team and consider the implications of her proposal, but privately I was already calculating how acquisition by Meridian would affect everyone who'd helped build Rodriguez Marketing Solutions from nothing into something valuable. The drive back to our offices gave me time to think about how much had changed since that morning when Robert Westfield had fired me to make room for his daughter. 2.5 years later, I was considering offers from companies that represented the pinnacle of industry success, while he was apparently facing the possibility of losing everything he'd built. Jessica was waiting in my office when I returned, along with David Kim and our newest hire, Patricia Gonzalez, who joined us from a struggling Chicago agency that had been absorbed by a larger competitor. "How did the meeting go?" Jessica asked. I described Amanda's proposal while watching my team's reactions to the possibility of joining a major corporate marketing group. David looked intrigued by the expansion opportunities, Patricia seemed relieved at the prospect of increased job security, and Jessica appeared to be calculating implications I hadn't considered. "What concerns do you have about the acquisition?" I asked Jessica, recognizing her analytical expression. "Mostly about maintaining the culture we've built here," she said. "Meridian is known for acquiring successful agencies and then gradually changing their operational practices to match corporate standards. We could lose the flexibility and responsiveness that make us effective with our current clients." Her concern was valid and reflected sophisticated understanding of acquisition dynamics that most people her age wouldn't have developed. Jessica had learned to think strategically about business decisions rather than just reacting to immediate opportunities. On the other hand, David said, Meridian's resources would allow us to pursue clients and projects that are beyond our current capabilities. We could maintain our culture while dramatically expanding our impact. The discussion continued for 2 hours, covering everything from potential salary increases to concerns about corporate bureaucracy affecting our client relationships. By the end of our meeting, the consensus was cautiously optimistic about exploring the acquisition opportunity, while negotiating protections for the operational autonomy that had made our success possible. 2 weeks later, while I was still evaluating Meridian's offer and negotiating terms that would protect our team's interests, Sarah Martinez called with news that changed everything I thought I knew about the local industry landscape. "Emma," her voice carried excitement mixed with disbelief, "you're not going to believe what just happened at Westfield and Associates." "What now?" "My father just fired Jessica from Rodriguez Marketing Solutions." The statement was so unexpected that I thought I'd misheard her. "What do you mean he fired Jessica?" "Jessica works for me, not for him." "No, I mean he tried to fire her from your company. He showed up at your office this morning demanding to speak with her about family loyalty and professional obligations. When she refused to quit Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, he told her she was no longer welcome in the family business." The situation Sarah described was so bizarre that I struggled to process it. Robert apparently believed he still had authority over Jessica's career choices, even though she hadn't worked for his agency in over 2 years. "Where is Jessica now?" I asked. "Probably on her way back to your office. She left here about 20 minutes ago and she looked pretty shaken by the whole confrontation." I found Jessica in the parking lot, sitting in her car with tears streaming down her face. The confident professional I'd worked with for 2 years had been replaced by someone who looked emotionally devastated by whatever confrontation she'd just experienced. "What happened?" I asked, sliding into the passenger seat of her car. "He said I'd betrayed everything our family stood for by working for you," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said that helping you succeed was the same as destroying his business, and that I had to choose between family loyalty and professional integrity." The ultimatum Robert had given his daughter revealed the depth of his desperation and the extent to which his business failures had affected his judgment. Instead of taking responsibility for the decisions that had led to his agency's decline, he was blaming Jessica for choosing competence over nepotism. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "I told him that I'd learned more about business ethics and professional competence working for you than I ever learned working for him. I told him that choosing merit over family connections was the best decision I'd ever made." Her response had apparently triggered the emotional explosion that led to his attempt to fire her from a job he had no authority over. He said that if I wouldn't quit Rodriguez Marketing Solutions voluntarily, He would make sure that working for you became impossible. He's planning to tell everyone in the industry that you built your success on stolen clients and unethical business practices. Robert's threat felt familiar, like an echo of the legal accusations he'd made 2 years earlier. But this time, his desperation seemed more dangerous because it was motivated by personal betrayal rather than just business competition. "Jessica," I said carefully, "you know that nothing he says can actually affect your position here, right? You've earned your role through your work, and no family drama can change that." She nodded, wiping tears from her face with the determination of someone choosing strength over self-pity. "I know. But Emma, there's something else you need to know about my father's situation. The bankruptcy rumors are worse than we thought. Westfield and Associates has less than 3 months before they'll be forced to close permanently." The timeline Jessica described meant that Robert's business failure was imminent rather than theoretical. His increasingly erratic behavior was probably driven by the desperate realization that everything he'd built was about to disappear. That evening, I made a decision that surprised even me. Instead of focusing entirely on Meridian's acquisition offer or Robert's threats, I called an emergency meeting with my entire team to discuss a possibility none of us had previously considered. "What would you think," I asked my assembled colleagues, "about acquiring Westfield and Associates?" The question hung in the conference room air, like a challenge to everything we thought we knew about competition, justice, and business strategy. David looked intrigued, Patricia seemed confused, and Jessica appeared to be calculating implications faster than she could process them. "You want to buy my father's agency?" Jessica asked. "I want to save the jobs of talented people who are suffering because of poor management decisions they had no control over," I said. "Sarah, Mike, and 4 other professionals are facing unemployment because Robert made strategic mistakes that compromised his business model. The acquisition would serve multiple purposes beyond simple expansion. It would preserve employment for people I respected, eliminate a competitor who'd been actively trying to damage our reputation, and demonstrate industry leadership that would strengthen our position in any future negotiations with companies like Meridian." "How would that work practically?" David asked. "We acquire their client contracts, hire their best employees, and absorb their operational capabilities while maintaining Rodriguez Marketing Solutions as the primary brand," I explained. "Essentially, we'd be consolidating the local market while preserving the jobs and relationships that matter." Jessica was quiet for several minutes, clearly processing emotional implications that extended far beyond business strategy. "What would happen to my father?" she asked finally. "That would depend on whether he's willing to accept a consulting role focused on client relationships, rather than management responsibilities," I said. "He has value as an industry veteran with long-standing connections, but he'd need to accept that operational control would transfer to people who've demonstrated competence in building sustainable business practices." The proposal I was describing would essentially reverse every power dynamic that had existed when Robert fired me to make room for his daughter. He would become an employee of the company I'd built, while Jessica would continue advancing based on merit rather than family connections. 3 weeks later, the acquisition was complete. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions had absorbed Westfield and Associates, hired 6 talented professionals who might otherwise have faced unemployment, and established market dominance that made us an even more attractive acquisition target for companies like Meridian. Robert Westfield, after lengthy negotiations conducted through attorneys, had accepted a part-time consulting position that allowed him to maintain industry connections while transferring operational authority to people who'd proven their competence through results rather than relationships. The irony was profound, but more than irony, the acquisition represented justice achieved through success rather than revenge. I hadn't destroyed Robert's business. His own poor decisions had done that. I'd simply created an alternative that preserved what was valuable, while correcting what was dysfunctional. 6 months later, I accepted Meridian's revised acquisition offer, which now included the expanded capabilities and market position that came from consolidating the regional marketing landscape. Rodriguez Marketing Solutions became a Meridian subsidiary with full operational autonomy and resources for national expansion. Jessica was promoted to Vice President of Strategic Development, a position she'd earned through demonstrated competence and leadership rather than family connections. Her father continued working as a client relations consultant, gradually rebuilding relationships with industry colleagues who respected his experience while recognizing that his management authority had been transferred to more capable hands. The transformation was complete, but the story had evolved far beyond simple revenge into something more complex and ultimately more satisfying. The creation of value that served everyone's interests while establishing that merit matters more than connections, competence more than nepotism, and character more than convenience. Sometimes justice looks like punishment, but sometimes it looks like opportunity for everyone to find their appropriate place in a structure built on fairness rather than favoritism. The interview room felt different this time. Instead of being the candidate hoping for approval, I sat across from a young woman whose resume reminded me of myself 5 years ago. Ambitious, qualified, and desperate for someone to give her a chance to prove what she could accomplish. "Tell me about your biggest professional challenge," I said to the candidate, watching her calculate how honest she should be with a potential employer. "I've been working at a family business where advancement seems based more on relationships than performance," she said carefully. "I love the work, but I feel like my contributions aren't being recognized or developed properly." Her answer sparked recognition that went deeper than professional sympathy. She was describing the exact situation Jessica had escaped when she chose to leave her father's agency and build her career on merit instead of nepotism. "What would you want from an employer who gave you that opportunity?" I asked. "Clear expectations, honest feedback, and advancement based on what I contribute rather than who I know," she replied without hesitation. After the interview ended and we'd made our hiring decision, Jessica joined me in my office with the quarterly reports that showed Rodriguez Marketing Solutions continuing to exceed every projection we'd established during the Meridian acquisition. "She reminds me of someone," Jessica said with a knowing smile. "Who?" "Me, about 3 years ago. Smart, frustrated, and ready to prove that she can succeed when given a fair chance." The parallel was obvious once Jessica pointed it out. Our new hire represented the kind of talented professional who thrived when removed from toxic workplace dynamics and given opportunities to demonstrate competence. "Speaking of proving yourself," I said, "I have news about your next career development opportunity." Jessica raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by whatever announcement I was preparing to make. "Meridian has offered you the position of regional director for their Midwest expansion. It would mean relocating to Minneapolis and managing a portfolio of agencies similar to what we've built here." The promotion represented everything Jessica had worked toward since joining Rodriguez Marketing Solutions: recognition based on demonstrated results, authority earned through competence, and advancement that reflected her actual contributions rather than family connections. "That's an incredible opportunity," she said, though I could hear hesitation in her voice. "But you're not sure you want it?" "I'm not sure I want to leave what we've built here. This company feels like home in ways that my father's agency never did." Her response touched something deeper than professional loyalty. Jessica had found her identity at Rodriguez Marketing Solutions, discovering who she could become when freed from the expectations and limitations of nepotism. "What if I told you that Meridian is also offering me the opportunity to establish a consulting division that would allow Rodriguez Marketing Solutions to maintain independence while accessing corporate resources for expansion?" Jessica's eyes lit up with the possibility I was describing. Instead of being absorbed into Meridian's corporate structure, we could maintain our culture while gaining capabilities that would allow us to compete on a national level. We could build something even bigger while keeping everything that makes this place special? Exactly. And you could run the consulting division here while I focus on strategic development across Meridian's network. The arrangement would allow both of us to advance based on our individual strengths while preserving the partnership that had made Rodriguez Marketing Solutions successful. 6 months later, I stood in our expanded office space watching Jessica conduct orientation for 12 new employees who joined our consulting division. The growth had been rapid but sustainable, built on the foundation of workplace culture that valued competence over connections. Sarah Martinez had become our Director of Client Services, finally working in an environment where her analytical skills were appreciated rather than undervalued. Mike Thompson was leading our creative department with the artistic freedom he'd never experienced under Robert's micromanagement. Even Patricia Gonzalez had found her niche developing training programs that helped other agencies improve their operational efficiency. The most surprising development was Robert himself. His consulting role had evolved into something that utilized his genuine strengths while minimizing the management weaknesses that had destroyed his business. He'd become effective at relationship building and client development. When removed from operational authority he'd never been qualified to handle. "Emma," he said during one of our monthly check-ins, "I owe you an apology that goes beyond what I said at that conference." "For what, specifically?" "For not recognizing that firing you was the worst business decision I've ever made. You didn't just build a successful company. You created opportunities for people I'd failed to develop properly." His acknowledgement felt like closure for resentments I'd moved beyond years earlier. Robert's failures had ultimately led to better outcomes for everyone involved, including himself. "I learned something important from watching what you built," he continued. "Success isn't about maintaining control over other people's opportunities. It's about creating conditions where talented people can achieve their potential." That evening, I reflected on how completely our situations had reversed from that morning when he'd fired me to make room for his daughter. Now Jessica was thriving in leadership roles she'd earned through competence, while Robert was finding satisfaction in work that matched his abilities rather than his ambitions. The real victory wasn't that I'd succeeded despite his efforts to limit my opportunities. The real victory was that I'd built something sustainable that created value for everyone willing to contribute meaningfully to its success. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica. "Dad just called to tell me he's proud of the career I've built." First time he's ever said that. Her message captured everything important about what we'd accomplished together. Jessica had proven that she could succeed on merit when given the chance, while Robert had learned that authentic pride came from watching his daughter achieve something she'd earned, rather than something she'd inherited. The transformation was complete, but the impact would continue expanding as our approach to business influenced other companies, other employees, and other families dealing with the complications of mixing personal relationships with professional advancement. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's poor judgment determine your potential. Sometimes justice means creating opportunities for everyone to find their appropriate place in structures built on fairness rather than favoritism. And sometimes the person who fires you to hire their daughter ends up working for the company you build from the ashes of their mistake, while their daughter advances based on the competence she develops when freed from the limitations of nepotism. The circle had closed exactly where it should have, with merit determining outcomes, character defining relationships, and competence creating opportunities for everyone willing to earn them. That's how you turn termination into transformation, setbacks into success, and nepotism into the motivation to build something better than what you lost. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.